Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming along on what is turning out to be quite a nice day. Thunderstorms haven't arrived just yet. That image on the screen comes from the Belfast Telegraph. Actually, it's from July 1945, where basically they were saying, we're coming to close you down. They had predicted a month in advance that the war in the Far East was going to come. So instead of the rising sun, you're getting the setting sun, the sun setting on the Japanese Imperial Empire. As Stephen said, this is going to be looking, there's a lot of people who died from Northern Ireland who are buried overseas but commemorated here. I'm focusing just in on the ones where I know there's a headstone that commemorates a fatality of the war in the Far East in captivity. I'm doing another talk tonight which will look at people, men and women who died on active service, but there's just too much to put it all into one talk. So the battle for Hong Kong lasted from 8th to 25th December 1941. The Hong Kong garrison consisted of British, Indian and Canadian units along with the Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps, which was established at the start of the war. The Malayan campaign lasted from 8th December 41 until the fall of Singapore on the 15th of February 42. The Battle of Java lasted from 28th February to 12th March 1942. The Battle for Borneo lasted from 16th December 41 to March 1942. So you can see how much the Japanese gained in the matter really of about 6 months, less than 6 months. The armies of Japan and Thailand invaded the British colony of Burma, which is present-day Myanmar, in December 1941, which resulted in the capture of Rangoon and the retreat of British, Indian and Chinese forces into India, as it then was, which would include what's now Bangladesh. From 1942 to 45, the Allies and Japan engaged in a protracted struggle for the control of the region, marked by fierce fighting in challenging terrain, mainly in jungles, and possibly one of the most well-known units from that time is what was called the Long-Range Penetration Group, which is better known as the Chindits, which was formed by Ord Wingate. And basically, because of the terrain, it was more of a guerrilla action than a formal military action. The Empire of Japan occupied the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, in March 1942 until the end of the war. So that map on the screen shows you the red is the extent of the Japanese Imperial Empire that invaded Korea and China and parts of Japan in the mid-1930s. So basically, they'd been grabbing land from about 1935. And that's how much. So if you look at the size of Japan, the islands that make up Japan, and then look, which is the maroon or dark red color, and then look at the red, that shows how much territory they had managed to gain by March 1942. There are family memorials in local graveyards commemorating 59 people from Ulster who died during the war in the Far East, with 22 dying during incarceration. 3 of those who died in incarceration were civilians and 1 was a woman. All the following biographies relate to people who died in Japanese captivity and are commemorated on headstones in graveyards in Ulster, and actually they're all in Northern Ireland. I'm going to start with biographies of 9 Ulstermen who died whilst being transported by sea as prisoners or internees. So basically any military personnel, Army, Navy, Air Force, who were captured during the campaign were prisoners of war, but the civilians who were captured mainly during the fall of Singapore were interned. So technically they're not prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention, but they are internees of war. But in essence, there was very little difference between the way the civilians were treated and the way military personnel were treated. If anyone who's ever watched Tenko will know. 7 of the 9 fatalities are commemorated on the Singapore Memorial, and 2 Royal Naval fatalities are commemorated on the Portsmouth Naval Memorial. The Japanese transports were given the name hell ships because of the overcrowded conditions in which the men were held and the lack of food and water in tropical heat. Many people died of malnutrition or medical conditions such as dysentery. So this vessel that you can see on the screen is the SS Lisbon Maru. And she was sailing between Hong Kong and Japan when she was torpedoed and sunk in the China Sea by the American submarine USS Grouper. The ship was not marked as carrying prisoners. So as far as the Americans were concerned, it was a legitimate target. They didn't know whether it was carrying troops, Japanese troops, or whether it was carrying prisoners. At least that's what the Americans said. On board were 700 Japanese soldiers and 1,816 British prisoners of war who'd been captured during the Battle of Hong Kong in December 41. When the ship was struck, the Japanese troops were evacuated from the ship to other ships in the convoy, and the hatches to the holds in which the POWs were being held were battened down, they were sealed, and basically the men were left to their fate. Eventually some of the POWs were able to break through the battens and were able to clamber onto deck, whereupon the Japanese soldiers in accompanying ships opened fire with machine guns. Some of them managed to get into the sea to try to swim to safety, and again the Japanese shot them whilst they were in the sea. It is reported by survivors that men of the Royal Artillery who could not escape were last heard singing "It's a Long Way to Tipperary." I cannot stand over that as being factual, but that's what some of the survivors said when they were liberated after the war. Over 800 British POWs died in the incident, either by drowning or being shot by Japanese soldiers as they tried to escape. Approximately 380 British POWs were rescued by nearby Chinese fishermen, but were soon recaptured by the Japanese. The remaining 644 POWs were rescued by nearby Japanese naval vessels. 2 naval men who were stationed at HMS Tamar, which was a shore base in Hong Kong, died in the incident and are commemorated in local graveyards. They're also commemorated on the Portsmouth Naval Memorial. And the Commonwealth War Graves Commission database records that they died on 2nd October 1942. Signalman Hans Calvert was 26 years old and is commemorated on a family memorial in Cumber Cemetery. He was born on 22nd February 1916 at Fort William Parade in Belfast to Thomas Matthews Calvert and Sarah Jane Lappin, who were living at Kalinchy Street in Cumber when their son died. Hans had joined the Royal Navy in 1940 and his brother served with the Royal Air Force. Hans is commemorated on the Cumber and District War Memorial and on the memorial tablet for 2nd Cumber Presbyterian Church. I'm assuming that the family had some Germanic connections because Hans is a very sort of Dutch-German forename. Second one is able seaman John Raphael Crangle, who was in the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve and was 25 years old when he died. He is commemorated on a family memorial in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery. He was born on 22nd March 1917 at Killoch near Downpatrick to John Crangle and Sarah Burns. This is another one of the hell ships. This is the SS Nagata Maru. And you'll have to excuse some of my pronunciation of some of the locations because my Japanese is not very good. In fact, it's non-existent. And it's only marginally better than my French. 3 Ulstermen died whilst being transported on SS Nagata Maru. John Carlisle MacDonald enlisted with the Royal Ulster Rifles in 1921 and was serving with 1st Battalion in 1925, being stationed in Cologne with the Army of the Rhine after the First World War. James transferred to the Royal Artillery in 1938 and was serving as a gunner with 12th Battery in the 6th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment when he was taken prisoner on Java on 8th March 1942. He died on board this transport ship on 10th November 1942, aged 39, and was buried at sea. His death was officially reported in the War Office casualty list dated 26th January 1946. So in all of that period, his family at home from November 1942 when he was reported missing, they still had the hope that he was a prisoner of war. The exchange of information between the Japanese and the Allies was atrocious. Very slow to get information out, very slow to get contact with individual prisoners. James is commemorated. So it was only after the Japanese surrender that the Allied authorities were able to go in and find out which prisoners had survived and were still in captivity and had been liberated, and which ones were not. And by that mechanism, they could work out which fatalities had died. Sometimes the German POW cards will record the date of death, but they're all in Japanese, which doesn't really help. But they're a fantastic resource. Have you seen any of them, Andy? You need to see some of them, they're fantastic. Date of birth, parents' names, where the parents lived, all that sort of stuff. If you hang about, I'll show you a few. Andy Glenfield runs the Second World War in Northern Ireland on Facebook website. Very good website, very good information on how the Second World War impacted Northern Ireland as a whole, including before and after shots of blitzed streets with how they look now. Am I right? But also quite a bit of information on people who died and their fatalities who died and are buried in Northern Ireland. A lot of Canadian, New Zealanders, Australians, some Americans. He's done stuff on the Lisnashara burial ground, which was the main American burial ground. Well worth a visit. As is Scott Edgar's Wartime NI website. I'm going to be equal-handed here. Pardon me. So James Carlisle MacDonald, he's commemorated in a family memorial in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery. He was born in 1903 at Belfast Maternity Hospital to Edward MacDonald, a dealer, not a drug dealer. A dealer covered a multitude of different things. Basically, he could have been a rag and bone man, he could have been out, he could have been selling cattle. It doesn't specify, but basically he was a buyer and seller. And his mother was Nora Tierney, and they were living at Glen Park Street when he was born. The family was living at Cinnamon Street when a sister was born in 1913. James married Margaret Reed on 11th March 1925 at the Roman Catholic Church of St. Peter on the Falls Road. The Japanese POW card records that his parents lived at Mayfair Street and his wife lived at Nail Street when he died. For some of these guys, I have newspaper photographs, mostly taken from microfilm, so the quality is sometimes good and sometimes not so good. In the case of Hugh Craig, I would classify that in the not so good category. Aircraftsman Hugh Craig was serving as a driver with the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve at Kuantan Pahang in Malaya when he was taken prisoner on 8th March 1942. Different official sources record the date of death as either the 18th, 19th or 20th of November. He was 23 years old and is commemorated on a family memorial in the graveyard at First St. Field Presbyterian Church. The headstone records that he died on 18th November 1942, so that's probably the date of death that was on the telegram or the official notification that the family received from the War Office or the Air Ministry. He was born on 19th April 1919 to John Craig and Catherine Whiteman, who farmed land at Ravara near Kilmood. Hugh married Margaret Carse on 3rd October 1940 at Ballygowan Presbyterian Church, and they lived at Ballynichol. Hugh is commemorated, as well as being commemorated in the graveyard, he's commemorated on the memorial tablet for First St. Field Presbyterian Church. Thomas Finlay was working as a motor driver when he enlisted with the Royal Artillery and was serving as a gunner with 95 Battery in the 48th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment. Stationed at the Moluccas Islands when he was taken prisoner on 20th March 1942. You can all go home and check your online maps for Moluccas and all these other places, because to be honest, I just know they're over there somewhere. They're part of what is now Indonesia, part of what was at that stage the Dutch East Indies. He died of dysentery on 20th November 1942, aged 27. His death was verified in the War Office casualty list again in January 1946. He's commemorated on this family memorial in Carnmoney Cemetery, main cemetery, and he was born on 25th May 1915 at Drumnadroe in White House to Charles Finlay and Agnes Moore, and they were living at Glenbrook Terrace on the Shore Road when he died. 2 Ulstermen died whilst being transported from Thailand to Japan on SS Mansumara. Gunner John Hanson was serving with 118 Field Regiment Royal Artillery when he was taken prisoner at Singapore when it fell on 15th February 42. He died on 12th September 1944 at the age of 26. He's commemorated on this family memorial in the Roman Catholic Cemetery in Lisburn. John was born on 6th July 1918 at can't even pronounce the Irish words, let alone the Japanese ones, Knockalocha in County Kerry, to Martin Hanson, a policeman, and Catherine Shanahan, and they later lived at Hullshill in Knockmore, Lisburn, after Martin retired from the RIC. He may well have gone on to the RUC in 1922. John was a civil servant when he enlisted and was awarded the Military Medal in 1940. So that would have been whilst he was in France, probably during the retreat to Dunkirk. He was reported as missing on 15th February and 42 and was confirmed as a prisoner of war in June 1943. So it took over a year for his status as a prisoner of war to be verified. His death was reported in the War Office casualty list dated 22nd March 1945. This newspaper photograph is what I would classify as being in the pretty darn good category. Thomas Finlay was working as a... would help if I talked about the right man, wouldn't it? Corporal Thomas Patrick Foots was serving with 1st Battalion Manchester Regiment when he was taken prisoner on 15th February 1942 at Singapore. He was confirmed as being a prisoner of war in September 1943, so again 18 months later. Corporal Foote died of malnutrition on 21st September 1944, aged 32, on board that Hell ship. His death was officially announced in January 1946, and he's commemorated on that family memorial in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery. Thomas was born on 18th July 1912 at Upton Street in Belfast to Robert Foots and Kathleen McKinnigan, and they were living at Kent Street when their son died. In the military and POW records, his surname is recorded as Foote instead of Foots, which meant that when I was trying to find information about him, I was wondering why I couldn't find anything. The next hell ship is the SS Maros Maru. You see they all had Maru at the end. I'm not sure if that had any particular resonance. It's the same as a lot of the ships of the Ulster Steamship Company, all had the name Head. So you had Malin Head, you had Tor Head, you had whatever. And the line, the name of the line was the Headline Shipping Company. So Ulster Steamship Company, W. Hayne was the owner or the founder, but it also had different branches, and one of them was the Headline. This small Dutch vessel had been scuttled at Batavia in 1942 before the capitulation of the Dutch East Indies. It was refloated by the Japanese in 1943 and renamed as Maros Maru. 500 Dutch and British POWs boarded the ship at Ambon in the Moluccas Islands on 17th September 1944. A further 150 prisoners were loaded onto the ship. And look at the size of the ship. Another 150 were picked up as the ship continued her journey down through the Dutch East Indies, what's now Indonesia, so stopping at each island and picking up prisoners. 650 prisoners on this ship. The ship was barely seaworthy and had limited facilities or space for the large number of men now packed on board. During the journey, the ship suffered engine difficulties and docked at Makassar in the South Celebes for repairs. She was in dock for 40 days. And during those 40 days, the POWs were not allowed to leave the ship. So tropical heat, they were given very little food or water, and basically it was like being in a Turkish bath, I suppose, or a steam room for 40 days.
Nigel, can I ask, where were they going then? Eventually,
They would have been picking them up as they went down through the Indonesian islands. They could have been going to Thailand to be put to work in the railways and things like that. Some of the men from this area would have ended up working on the Burma Railway, or they could have been taken directly to Japan. Unfortunately, I just know where the ship stopped at various points, but I don't know where its end point was. So sometimes it was just bringing small groups of prisoners of war into larger groups to put them into a prisoner of war camp on a mainland where they could be worked to death. 325 out of the 650 men that were the prisoners that were on board that vessel died during the journey. That's 50%. 2 Ulstermen died on board the ship, not when it was docked, but when it was at sea, and they are buried at sea. Corporal William Cummings Taylor of the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve died on 29 September 1944, aged 33. He's commemorated on this family memorial in Belfast City Cemetery. And this coming Sunday at 2 p.m, I'm going to be doing a tour of 5 plots in Belfast City Cemetery where there are victims of the war in the Far East commemorated, including Corporal Taylor's. William was born on 25th September 1911 at Upper Meadow Street to Thomas George Taylor and Elizabeth Hamilton, who were living at Dunluce Avenue when their son died. William had married Hilda Annie McCormick on 30th January 1936 at St Bartholomew's Church of Ireland. They were married at St Bartholomew's Church of Ireland in Stranmillis. They were living at Willesden Park when Hilda, his wife, died at the Royal Victoria Hospital on 17th April 1939 at the age of 29. William was an assistant manager at Ferris and Company of Waring Street, which was described as a cartage firm. We would now call it a hauliers firm. And he joined the Merchant Navy in 1940. He was one of only 8 survivors when his ship was torpedoed and sunk. He then joined the Royal Air Force and was stationed at Tenga in the Malay Peninsula when he was taken prisoner in the fall of Singapore. So he survived a torpedo and sinking, and he ends up dying on board a Japanese ship. Thomas Patterson Muckle, a well-known local amateur boxer, was employed as a butcher by Edmund Mills of Windmill Road in Bangor when he joined the Royal Air Force in 1938. He was serving as a corporal with 211 Squadron when he was taken prisoner on 8th March 1942 in Java. He died of bacillary dysentery on 9th October 1944, aged 33, and he's commemorated on the Donaghadee District War Memorial, on a family memorial in Ballyvester Cemetery, and on the memorial plaque in Shore Street Presbyterian Church in Donaghadee. He was born on 6 September 1921 at Portavoe near the town to John Muckle and Margaret Anna Small. So those are the men who died whilst being transported as prisoners of war. The remainder of the talk relates to 12 men and 1 woman who died in prisoner of war or internment camps. 4 of the fatalities are buried in Thailand. 2 are buried in Myanmar, which was Burma. 2 are buried in Shanghai, and 2 are buried in Japan. One of these fatalities is buried in Singapore, another in Indonesia, and the third is buried in Hong Kong. Ooh. Yes, Thomas Black. Thomas Black was working as a civilian in Singapore when he enlisted with the Singapore Volunteer Corps. He was taken prisoner on 15th February 1942 when Singapore fell, and he died from a bacterial infection at Changi POW camp in Singapore on 20th April 1942. So basically 2 months after he was captured. He was 34 years old and is buried in the Kranji War Cemetery and commemorated on the Steele family grave at Gorchin Church of Ireland in County Tyrone. Thomas was born on 7th December 1907 at Aberdour in Aberdeenshire to James Oliphant Black, a headmaster of North School in Fraserburgh, and his wife Marjorie Duncan. He was a chartered accountant and was living at Anstruther in Fife when he sailed from England on 16th October 1930, bound for Singapore on board SS Kalyan. During a period of home leave, the civilians who went to places like Singapore, Shanghai, Hong Kong, civilian work, they would quite often come home every couple of years for like a long leave, 6 months or so. He married Mary Jane Steele, a nurse from County Tyrone at Kirkcaldy in Fife in around 1932. Mary Jane Steele had qualified as a nurse at the Royal Infirmary in Sheffield and became a state registered nurse on 25th November 1932. Having returned to Japan, Thomas sailed back to England from Yokohama, arriving in London in March 1935, this time on board the SS Rajputana. Thomas, Mary Jane and their daughter Elizabeth Jane, 5 years old, were living at High Street in Kirkcaldy when the family sailed to Singapore on board SS Beringia, leaving England on 12th December 1938. Mary Jane and Elizabeth Black returned to the UK. They were evacuated from the Malaya Peninsula as the Japanese advanced down the peninsula. In January 1945, they were living in Kirkcaldy when Mary Jane received a British postcard from a British nurse informing her about the death of her husband. An Ardsman this time. Aircraftsman Francis Meredith of the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve was taken prisoner on 8th March 1942 and was transported to Japan on board the SS Dainichi Maru. He arrived at Moji on 28th November 1942 and died of acute colitis in a POW in Japan on 3rd December 1942, aged 26. I have the name of the Japanese POW camp, but I don't know how to pronounce it, and if I did, it would sound very rude. He's commemorated on the Yokohama Cremation Memorial, so obviously his body was cremated. He's also commemorated on a family memorial in Mavilla Cemetery in Newtonards and on the Newtonards and District War Memorial. Francis was born on 29th February 1916 at Church Street in Newtonards to James Gardner Meredith and Mary Jane Bennett. His father had served with the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers in the Second Anglo-Boer War, which is 1899-1902, and in the Great War. Francis married Margaret Sloane on 25th December 1940 at St. Mark's Parish Church, and she was living at West Street when Francis died. 4 brothers of Francis served in the Second World War, and Lance Sergeant John Meredith was serving with 2nd Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers when he was killed on active service on 18th April 1945, aged 23. Captain George Ian Wilson Lusk of the Royal Army Medical Corps had escaped from the rapidly advancing Japanese invasion force in Burma in 1942. He was attached to the Prince of Wales' own Gurkhas during Operation Longcloth, and this was the operational name for Ord Wingate's Chindits and their guerrilla campaign in Burma. George was taken prisoner at the Irrawaddy River on 23rd April 1943 and died 7 days later at the age of 26. He is commemorated on the Rangoon Memorial, on the Queen's University War Memorial, and on the Banbridge and District War Memorial. He's also commemorated in the graveyard at Glasgow Presbyterian Church, which is where that headstone is, and on the memorial tablets for Glasgow Presbyterian Church, Foyle College in Londonderry, and the Queen's University Officers Training Course. So he's commemorated in about half a dozen different places. His death was verified in the War Office casualty list dated 20th December 1945. So again, 2 years after he died. George was born on 10th July 1916 at Ballynaskey near Loch Brickland to the Reverend John Brown Lusk, who was the minister of Glasgow Presbyterian, and Margaret Dewar Wilson. He was educated at Foyle College and gained the Northern Ireland Senior Certificate in June 1934, entering Queen's University later the same year to study medicine. George was in medical practice in Buckingham in England when he obtained his commission in April 1941. The family memorial records died in action in Burma 1942. So the year that's recorded on the headstone is incorrect. This is another, these two photographs come from this man's Australian service records. So basically they're about that. It's sort of like the photographs you'd get in a photo booth. But it looks like all the Australian service records all have a photograph of the man, albeit very small. But they're frontal and then side view. So Archie Shepherd Turner was working as a travelling salesman for an electrical fittings firm when he enlisted for war service on 18th June 1940 at Paddington in Sydney. Sapper Turner was serving with 12 Field Company Royal Australian Engineers when he was taken prisoner on 15th February 1942. He was hospitalised with malaria at Changi POW camp in March 1943, and he was then moved to another prisoner of war camp where he died of dysentery on 6th June 1943, aged 36. He is buried, and this is one of the difficult ones, he is buried in the Thanbu Yuzayet War Cemetery in Birmingham. And I've written it out phonetically here so I could actually try and pronounce it. And he's commemorated on the family memorial in the graveyard at Clocker Presbyterian Church, and also on the memorial tablet inside the church. This stone here is his headstone in the cemetery. So you can see it's not the traditional upright white limestone Commonwealth War Graves headstone. Instead, it's a recumbent plaque, and it's, as you can see, it's black, but it also has the insignia of the Australian Imperial Force embossed on it. I'm assuming that that's possibly a earthquake zone, and that's why it's a recumbent plaque, but I don't know that for certain. Archie was born on 9th January 1907 in Clocker to Thomas Turner and Rebecca Jane Cuthbertson, and the family later emigrated to New South Wales, where Archie had married Lorna Elizabeth Clark in 1936. John McFerrin Cassidy joined the Ulster Division of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve and had served on HMS Caroline for 3 years before being mobilised for war service in 1939. He was a joiner, and he was stationed at HMS Tamar in Hong Kong when he was taken prisoner in December 1941. With the Royal Navy, their shore bases were given HMS designations. So when it says HMS, HMS stands for His Majesty's Ship, but it wasn't actually a ship. It was the name of the base, which confuses some people, because I've seen some people saying, oh yes, he died on board SS or HMS whatever, and it turns out that HMS was a concrete shore base which didn't go to sea. He survived the sinking of the SS Lisbon Maru, which I talked about at the start, in October 1942, but then died of heart failure at Osaka in Japan on 29th June 1943. He is buried in the Yokohama War Cemetery in Japan and commemorated on this family memorial in Dundonald Cemetery. He's also commemorated on the Craigan District Second World War Memorial plaque or tablet. John was born on 10th October 1919 at My Lady's Road to Thomas Cassidy and Jane Ferguson McFerrin. That's where he gets his middle forename from. Thomas Cassidy, his father, had served with the Royal Navy in the Great War and was allocated one of the ex-servicemen's houses at Picardy Avenue in Craiga. A sister served with the Women's Auxiliary Air Force during the war. I don't know if a lot of people here know about the ex-servicemen's houses, but I'll be giving a talk about the ex-servicemen's houses specifically at Craiga in October this year in this very room. Flying Officer Francis Raymond Moore was born on 19th December 1906 at Redcliffe in Bangor to Dr. Robert Lee Moore and Frances Gill, and he was educated at St. Bees Grammar School for Boys in Copeland, Cumberland. Francis trained as a draftsman and married Agnes Tate Prenter on 1st November 1934 at St. Anne's Church of Ireland Cathedral. He qualified as an assistant surveyor in 1937 and was employed as an ordnance survey assistant when he joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve. He was appointed as a pilot officer, with the Administrative and Special Duties branch on 7th February 1941 and promoted to flying officer exactly a year later. Flying Officer Moore was serving at Air Headquarters in Bandung in West Java when he was taken prisoner on 8th March 1942. The County Down Spectator reported that Francis was attached to the intelligence branch, but I have not found any documentary evidence to support that. But having said that, there's not a lot of documentary evidence for the Second World War for individual servicemen in terms of service records. So I'm hedging my bets on that one. The Spectator also records that he was shot down over Java, being reported as missing in action. He contracted beriberi and died of bacillary dysentery at a labour camp on Haruka Island on 15th July 1943, aged 36, and is buried in the Ambon War Cemetery in Indonesia. Flying Officer Moore is commemorated on a memorial tablet in Bangor Parish Church, on a family memorial in Bangor Cemetery, and on the Bangor and District War Memorial. He's also one of the 4 fatalities commemorated on this Roll of Honour, which is for the Ordnance Survey of Northern Ireland. When Osney was moving out of its premises in Stranmillis, this Roll of Honour was chucked in a skip and was rescued by one of the members of staff. And I'm not sure where it is now, but the last I heard, Tommy McClymonds was trying to find a suitable home for it. The War Memorial Museum over in Talbot Street said they would have to get permission from Osney to accept it when Osney had thrown it in the skip. I'm not sure where it should go now. Probably end up in the Somme Museum down in Conlig. One of 4 men commemorated on that memorial or that Roll of Honour. Francis Moore last saw his wife and his daughters Judy and Deirdre in 1940, and he never saw his youngest daughter Patricia Michelle, who was born on 22nd February 1941. When he died, his parents were living at Ward Avenue in Bangor, and his wife and their 3 children were living at the Main Road in Hollywood. Frederick Edward Weir enlisted with the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve and was posted to Seletar in Singapore. Corporal Weir was stationed in the Moluccas when he was taken prisoner on 20th March 1942. He died of dysentery on 26th July 1943, aged 29, and is buried in the Kanchanaburi War Cemetery in Thailand. I find if you say that one very, very quickly, you get away with it. Kanchanaburi. He is commemorated on a family memorial in Lurgan New Cemetery and on the Lurgan and District War Memorial. Frederick was born on 2nd June 1914 at Victoria Street in Lurgan to Thomas Weir, who was a weaver, and Mary Jane Malloy, and the family was living at Shore Road in Lurgan during the Second World War. The family memorial records his place of death as Java rather than Thailand because that's where he was taken prisoner. So they must have thought if he was taken prisoner in Java, that's where he must have died. It also indicates that the quality of the information being provided by the military authorities back to next of kin was maybe not all it should have been. Robert Henry Hare was working for the Island Spinning Company in Lisburn when he enlisted with the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve. Leading aircraftsman Hare was taken prisoner on 8 March 1942 and died from colitis on 9 August 43. He was 22 years old and was buried in the Chung Kai War Cemetery in Thailand. Commemorated on a family memorial in Lisburn Cemetery and on the War Memorial plaque in Lisburn Cathedral and on the Lisburn and District War Memorial. He was born on 12th November 1920 at Canal Street in the town to Robert Hare and Susan McCulloch. The Commonwealth War Graves database records his age as 23, and the family memorial records the death date as 9th March 1943. So errors have crept in, both from the family perspective and from Commonwealth War Graves. A lot of the ages on Commonwealth War Graves are out, usually by 1 year either side. John Reginald Walter Smith was serving as a gunner with 7th Coast Regiment Royal Artillery when he was reported missing following the fall of Singapore. He was verified as being a prisoner of war in June 1943 and died in 19 September 1943, aged 23. He's buried in the Kanchanaburi War Cemetery in Thailand and is commemorated on a family memorial in Carnmoney Church of Ireland Extension Graveyard. His death was verified in May 1945, and he was born on 6th July 1920 at Troy Lodge in Londonderry to John Smith and Mary Macaulay, who were living at King Street in the Waterside when their son died. It perplexed me why there was a family memorial in Carnmoney, but when I was looking at the dates and the information on the memorial, I found that John Smith died in Belfast. They were living in Belfast when he died in 1964. So that's why he's buried there. The family is buried there. Many of the people who died in Thailand and Burma as prisoners of war were probably employed on the Burma-Thailand Railway, which many people will know from that famous film. Gunner James Colgan was serving with 5 Searchlight Regiment Royal Artillery when he was reported as missing on 15th February 1942. He was reported as being a prisoner of war in October 42 and was 26 years old when he died from dysentery on 28th October 1943 and is buried in the Chung Kai War Cemetery. But his death was not officially verified until July 45. He's commemorated on a family memorial in Ramon Presbyterian Church Graveyard and on the Ballycastle and District War Memorial. James was born on 27th February 1917 to Moore Colgan and Catherine Hargy, who farmed land at Maccaramore near Ballycastle. Again, this is a modern headstone, and it records that he died in 1941 rather than 1943. I can't explain why these occur. I can only put it down to maybe there was a former headstone there and it was eroded, and whenever the stonemason was doing the new headstone, he misread it and put 41 instead of 43. This is Hubert James Lawson, who was born on 6th November 1897 at Main Street in Larne, to William Lawson, who was a company secretary of the Shamrock Shipping Company, and Isabella Norret. The family lived at Bonavista Terrace in 1901, Old Glenarm Road in 1911, and later at Elsinore on Chain Memorial Road. So I'd imagine they're going up and up in the social standings with those different addresses. Hubert was educated at Larne Grammar School and enlisted with the Royal Irish Fusiliers on 24th February 1916. He served on the Western Front with 9th Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers and was discharged as, quote, no longer physically fit for war service due to illness on 27th June 1917 with the Silver War Badge. He was boarding at 11 Fountainville Avenue in Belfast, which was the home of Miss E. Livingstone, and when he was awarded a 20% disability pension in respect of a collapsed lung at the rate of 8 shillings per week. Hubert was boarding there as he was studying medicine at Queen's University, and he graduated with his Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Science in July 1924. In 1927, he was a surgeon when he sailed home from Shanghai via New York. He married Marjorie Brockbank at Ulverston in Lancashire, the marriage being registered in the first quarter of 1928. The UK and Ireland Medical Register of 1930 records that Hubert was working for the Malayan Medical Service, hence the uniform, and you can see he's wearing the British War Medal and the Victory Medal from the Great War. And they were living in Penang province when their first son was born. Hubert was medical officer at Seremban before being appointed as the chief medical officer for Kelantan province. During the Japanese advance down the Malaya Peninsula, Hubert arranged for Marjorie and their 3 sons, John 14, Billy 12 and Dennis 9, to be evacuated to Australia. Hubert remained at his post at the Telo Anson Hospital in Perak, and he was interned by the Japanese at the fall of Singapore. On 29th October 1944, so 2.5 years after he had at least 2.5 years after he had last seen his wife and children, he was allowed to send a message card from Singapore to his family in Sydney. The message included the following line: "Trust will not be long before we are all united." Dr. Hubert James Lawson died of a stomach tumour at the Seam Road Civilian Internment Camp on 2nd December 1944, aged 47, and is buried in the Cho Chu Kang Cemetery in Singapore. Marjorie and her sons returned to Northern Ireland and were living with Hubert's parents in Larne. Dr. Lawson's name, that's a tablet in the graveyard where he's buried. This is the side panel at the family grave in the Greenland Cemetery in Larne, where he's commemorated. His name was recently added to a war memorial plaque, the war memorial plaque at Larne Grammar School. And as I said, he's commemorated on the side panel of the Lawson family plot in Larne's Greenland Cemetery. Now, he was a civilian. He would not qualify for the Larne War Memorial because he was not a military fatality. But schools and churches and employers do not have to adhere to the same level of, same criteria as a civil authority. So a school can take somebody who was a civilian and died as a civilian during the war and add them to the memorial, whereas a civic organisation, as a civic council, would not be able to do the same. Generally, I haven't come across any civilians commemorated on civic memorials. Not sure if you have, Andy. I'm only asking Andy because I know he's done research in the same area, so it helps to sort of bounce ideas. This is a fantastic photograph of a family wedding party. This lady here is Sarah Glover. She was born on 4th September 1882 at Kirkcudbright to James Glover, who was a teacher, and Mary Palmer, and the family was living at Shore Row in 1901 and 1911. Sarah married Archibald Blackmore, a marine engineer, on 12th June 1912 at Kirkcudbright Presbyterian Church, so you were about 22 years out. And they were living in Renfrewshire when their first child was born in 1913. Archibald was refused permission to enlist during the Great War, as he was employed on essential war work. So basically he was employed in one of the shipyards, and so he was deemed to be not a suitable person to be sent off to the front line. The Moir family was living at Campbell Street in Greenock when Archibald left England on board SS Kashgar on 2nd June 1927, bound for Shanghai. Sarah and her son John, 9, left England on board SS Malwa on 25th January 1929 to join Archibald in Shanghai. They later moved to Hong Kong, where Archibald worked at the Taiku dockyard, and they lived at Cornhill on Quarry Bay. John Moir, who had been born on 12th August 1919 at Port Glasgow, was an engineering lieutenant with the Royal Navy when he lost his life at the age of 22 when HMS Edinburgh was torpedoed and sunk by German submarine U-456 on 30th April 1942. Sarah Moir volunteered with the Hong Kong Auxiliary Nursing Service and was interned along with Archibald after the fall of Hong Kong. Sarah died of brain vessel thrombosis on 22nd December 1944, aged 62. Her place of burial has not been identified, but it's undoubtedly in Hong Kong. But she is commemorated on a family memorial in the graveyard at St Andrew's Parish Church near Ballyhalbert, and that's the headstone for Sarah Moir née Glover. Now, civilians who died whilst being held by an enemy force or by an enemy nation qualify, irrespective of how they died, they qualify to be included on the civilian war dead list. Whereas a civilian who died in Belfast of the same complaint would not. Archibald was released from captivity after the Japanese surrender. He left Hong Kong on board SS Empire Lagan, a Ministry of War transport arriving at Liverpool on 20th November 1945, bearing in mind that in the previous 5 years he had lost his son and his wife, and he died on 13th January 1948 at the age of 67 on the Isle of Wight. After all those stories of death, I want to finish off on a slightly more positive note. This newspaper photograph shows 2 Ulstermen on their return from incarceration in the Far East. Sapper Hector Claude Marsh of the Royal Engineers and Private Thomas Colquhoun of the Royal Army Service Corps, who were both captured in the fall of Singapore in February 1942. Hector was born on 20th February 1919 at Francis Street in Newtonards to William George Marsh and Maria Martha Gelders, and the family was living at Castlereagh Road in 1943. Hector's father had served as a sergeant with the Royal Irish Rifles in the Great War and was serving as a captain with the Royal Ulster Rifles in Trinidad in September 1945. Hector told a reporter he had been held in various camps and his treatment was generally might have been worse, which is a very sort of ambiguous terminology, but that morale was always high. The food was poor and scanty, and letters few and far between. Sometimes years elapsed before news from home arrived, and then several letters arrived at once. He added that in his experience he fared worse at the hands of the Koreans than the Japanese. So I'm assuming that some of the camps where the guards were Koreans, native Koreans, working for the Japanese rather than native Japanese. Thomas Colquhoun was held at the same camp in Singapore from 1942 until its liberation. And he said he was worked pretty hard, but his treatment was not unbearable. The food, however, was always in short supply and monotonous, generally rice, in all probability. And that brings the talk to an end. Thank you very much for your attention.